Yeah, I mean, I have to say I'm a reductionist in this space a little bit. So for me, the mind is simply the part of the brain that we are aware of and experiencing. And I kind of don't go below that. I have somewhat of a Buddhist perspective where I don't really believe in consciousness. I believe in moments of consciousness, but not the overarching I. Like if the brain falls over, from my perspective, that's it. There is no mind outside of the corporeal boundary of the skull, so to speak, even though I know that there are non-local phenomena that we're observing now in the brain, and I'm sure you are deeper into this idea of, again, the physics affecting consciousness. I've just saw a paper last week that showed that water has some strange kind of non-local, I hate to use this word, but quantum tunneling in microtubules, apparently.
Yeah.
Under some conditions, it appears like water molecules have a superposition and can be in more than one place at once inside of cells.
Correct.
This is getting very quickly out of the realm of anything we fully understand. But do you think that we are getting to a place where we're starting to run up against the edge of well understood science, and we're off in the quantum weeds, or is there something here that we're making actual progress in actionable understanding of the brain?
Both. So quantum mechanics brings us to the limit of understandability, not just what we currently understand, but the upper limits on epistemology itself.
Yeah, measurability even, yeah.
And even beyond measurability, the upper limits on ontology, right?
Mm-hmm.
Heisenberg's theorem doesn't just say we can't know what it is because of measurement issues. It says and it depends on which interpretation of quantum mechanics, but standard model interpretation, its fundamental nature is not yet defined independent of an observation dynamic. That subject-object interaction are co-defining at the level of quantum particles.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very philosophically weird thing for us to think about using the intuition that we have from traditional larger particle physics.
Yeah.
Now, we have historically kind of written that off as just super weird phenomena that happens only below atoms and then cancels itself out at the level of atoms, and so we don't have to worry about it. The topic of quantum amplification. Are there quantum phenomena that then affect the behavior of things at a mesoscopic level?
At a Newtonian physics level, or?
Right.
Uh-huh.
So this is, the work of Stuart Kauffman, the work of other people at Santa Fe Institute of Complexity Science, the work of people like Stuart Hamerhoff have really shown quite clearly that quantum amplification does happen,
Mm-hmm.
which means that the non-deterministic, right, acausal phenomena at a quantum level are affecting macroscopic behavior at the level of brains that still follows probability distributions, but not determinism. And
Okay.
so this is a very interesting, right, very important weird topic, and the whole topic of microtubules in neurons in specific, and superposition dynamics and quantum information processing is
Mm-hmm.
one of the kind of interesting cutting edges in the field. The work of Stuart Hamerhoff and Roger Penrose kind of opened that space up.
Mm-hmm.
And the work of Dr. Honorbon, there's a few people kind of working in that space, and it is only scratching at the surface of what we can claim to know well, but there's already application happening in things like transcranial ultrasound that were based on the philosophy from there that seem to be having positive results. So it's a super interesting field.
Interesting. That's wonderful. Thanks for unpacking that just a touch for us.
I would say one more thing about the Buddhist perspective, the kind of John Searle idea of that the mind is what the brain does. This is one interpretation of Buddhism, right? There are different schools of Buddhism that have very different interpretations here. Obviously, the foundational idea of what's real in Buddhism coming from Vedanta was that consciousness is what we actually have a stronger sense of knowability on than physics,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Sure.
And so their model was, well, I know that I'm experiencing something. There's an experiencer here. I don't know that what I'm experiencing is what I think it is, but in an almost kind of Descartes-like way, there is some witness that is witnessing changing phenomena that is prima facie real, right? So their model was reductionist in the opposite direction, right? Rather that consciousness is an emergent property of physics, which is where physicalism and science has gone. They saw the rest of the universe as either not real or an emergent property of consciousness. And that kind of idealism, physicalism divide is right at the heart of what we're figuring out when we're studying consciousness via objective methods in brain science.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but old school, early Pali Buddhists wouldn't consider consciousness a phenomena outside of momentary experience. I mean, anicca, impermanence, the nature of reality is transient. So even consciousness, I always fall back to the metaphor, the classic metaphor, ship of Theseus. The thought experiment. Here's a model ship. If I replace one plank, is it the same ship? How about two? How about three? At what point is this capital I self the same if every 7 or 8 years all the molecules in my body are completely different and have been replaced? This is where it fundamentally breaks down for me personally in terms of consciousness. But would the Vedantic approach say that there is a cohesive sense of consciousness, or is it an emergent property of just having a meat suit?
So Sanskrit has a lot more words that have a lot more specificity in their definition than just consciousness, self-awareness. And they're actually very key distinctions in their philosophic system.
Okay.
So, and again, there are different interpretations in these systems, but the Buddhists traditionally say that the foundation of reality is neither self nor non-self, because that distinction doesn't exist at that level. That the rational distinction of the concept of self other than self is more superficial than the foundation of reality, right? It's ontologically less primary.
Okay.
So the idea that it's non-self or the idea that it's self are inadequate. So what we think of as self is self other than self-division, right? When they talk about a foundational oneness beyond division, it would be neither of those concepts, right? Not self nor non-self. That's different than the traditional way that is spoken about in Vedanta, which is that at the foundation of all of it, there is consciousness with a capital C that is different than self, right? That can, which is basically, if you think about it almost in terms of a unified field of physics as a field of potentiality for dynamics to occur, quantum foam to emerge from, etc., that there is reference happening, but it's reference within the only thing there is, so there's self-reference, and that the foundation of what we think of as self-referentiality happens at the level of unified field.
Interesting.
Now, I'm not saying this is what I think, but this is some of the kind of interpretations there. I will say there are real problems with most of the models of physicalism. There are real problems with these models, and this is why these are unsolved, famous problems in philosophy. And you even see, you'll see a couple physicalists, like the classic debate that Sam Harris and Dan Dennett had after Sam wrote his book on free will, was that Dan fundamentally said, consciousness isn't real, right? He's a radical eliminativist, it's an illusion, but free will is real. And Sam said, consciousness is fundamentally real, an emergent property of brain, but free will isn't real.
Okay.
This is a core disagreement on the most foundational concepts of existentialism, of what actually is, both being physicalists and having the same kind of critical thinking background, agreeing on a lot of other things. So it's part of why these have been so hard is they're beyond our current tools of knowing, our epistemologic tools. When we do science, we are studying third-person things. That's what we can do.
Yeah.
So when we try and study consciousness, which is first person, by looking at the third-person correlates, we're actually doing a category mistake by assuming that they're the same thing. Also, when we assume causation, when we get to the level of things that are for sure via Bell's theorem, acausal, our intuitions get off, right? And so these are fascinating and tricky areas. What we can say at the level of what's probably useful for people right now is that we can do things with our own subjective experience of self. So what we focus on, what we put our attention on, and the meaning we give to things that has a real effect on brain and physiology. And we can do things to our physiology that are not obviously utilizing our subjectivity that will affect our subjectivity. And there can be recursive effects between subjective and objective that can either, depending upon how you do them, have the potential of being virtuous cycles in more adaptive evolutionary directions or vicious cycles. And so learning how to use both the conscious direction of our thought, awareness, attention, and what we do with our physiology in mutually reinforcing adaptive ways is, I think, what we're interested in here.
Oh, wow. It's